Decades after the Bismarck terrorized Allied navies as the so-called Death Star of the sea, an underwater drone finally pierced its armored grave, only to reveal a chilling contradiction at the bottom of the Atlantic. The mighty battleship, thought to be shattered by over 700 British shells, lies upright with its 13 inches armor belt almost untouched, its decks crushed from within, and scars hinting at a violent end on a volcanic slope. Was Bismarck really sunk by enemy fire, or did something more deliberate seal its fate? The terrifying footage demands we confront the legend and unearth the truth buried 4 miles down. Nearly 5 kilometers beneath the surface, the Atlantic presses down with a force few machines, and no human body could survive. At this depth, the water exerts nearly 6,000 pounds per square inch, enough to crumple a steel drum as if it were made of paper. The Bismarck rests on the flank of an extinct volcano, perched on a slope, where geology and ocean meet in a darkness broken only by the brief glare of robotic lights. This abyss is not just cold and silent, but hostile in ways that shape everything left behind. Oxygen is scarce. Sunlight never reaches here, and the crushing weight of water slows the decay of metal and bone alike. Hull plates that might rust away in shallow water remain almost untouched. Their paint sometimes still visible after decades. Yet, the same pressure that preserves also distorts. Decks are pressed inward. Bulkheads bend and collapse. And the ship's interior is compacted by tons of water, forced in through every opening. The volcanic slope beneath the wreck creates its own hazards. A shifting foundation of rock and sediment, ready to grind and tear at anything that moves or settles. Here, evidence is both protected and transformed. The Bismarck's armored skin survives as a kind of time capsule, but the violence of its final descent, magnified by the abyss, has left scars no battle could explain. In this environment, every clue becomes a puzzle. Only technology built for the deep, remotely operated vehicles shielded in titanium, equipped with cameras and sensors, can reach this graveyard intact. The abyss preserves secrets, but it also crushes, distorts, and hides them, demanding new methods and new eyes to understand what truly happened in the ship's last moments. Robert Ballard's search for the Bismarck began with a 12-ton sled named Argo, towed behind a research vessel and bristling with cameras tough enough to face the deep. The plan was methodical. Sweep a grid mile after mile across 200 square miles of Atlantic seafloor. Each pass was tracked by sonar. The images fed in real time to a wall of monitors above. 4 days, the screens showed nothing but endless volcanic rock and silt, punctuated only by the occasional false lead. A sunken schooner, a field of boulders. The pressure at these depths was unforgiving, but Argo's titanium shell and redundant systems were designed for just this kind of endurance. On June 8, 1989, a flicker on the monitor broke the monotony. A twisted piece of metal, then a tangle of cables, then unmistakable shapes, a gun turret, a section of hull. The debris field stretched for hundreds of meters. A trail of destruction that led finally to the main wreck resting upright on the slope of a long-dead volcano nearly 4,800 m down. The stern was missing, torn away in the descent. But the bulk of the ship remained in one piece, monumental against the abyss. Inside the control room, silence replaced the usual chatter. The discovery was more than a technical triumph. It was a confrontation with history itself. Every image, every sonar trace was logged and preserved, creating a chain of custody that would anchor the investigation for years to come. Ballard's team kept the exact coordinates secret, wary of Lutters, and determined to protect the site as a war grave. The hunt had ended, but the real questions, the story written in steel and scars, were only beginning to surface. A closer look at Bismarck's hull reveals a paradox at the heart of its legend. The main armor belt, nearly 13 in thick and stretching the length of the citadel, stands almost untouched after the battle. Decades beneath the Atlantic have preserved its surface, and even now, the steel plating shows only faint scars where hundreds of shells struck, but failed to break through. Survey teams counted just 8 major shell holes above the waterline, most clustered in the superstructure or upper hull. Below the armored belt, penetrations are rare, almost non-existent. No obvious torpedo holes breach the main hull, and the citadel's defenses remain largely unbroken. The exterior tells a story of immense firepower, meeting engineering designed for survival. British battleships. Rodney and King George fired over 700 large-caliber shells in less than 2 hours. Yet the armored sides, mathematically calculated to resist even the heaviest British guns, absorbed or deflected nearly all direct hits. The few shell holes that do exist are ragged, their edges bent inward, but none open into the vital spaces below. The rest of the visible damage is concentrated high on the ship. Shredded superstructure, collapsed masts, and twisted gun turrets, all above the main line of defense. For naval engineers, the evidence is stark. The hull's buoyancy and basic structure were not destroyed by external fire alone. The armored belt did its job, leaving the lower hull intact, even as the upper works were devastated. This mismatch between the scale of the attack and the limited exterior damage raises a fundamental question. If the main defenses held, how did Bismarck sink so quickly and so completely? The answer, it seems, lies not in what the guns did to the outside, but in what happened within and in the forces that acted after the battle was over. British gunnery logs from the morning of May 27, 1941 record a volume of fire almost without precedent. HMS Rodney alone fired 34,016 inches shells while King George V added 339 14-inches rounds. Norfolk and Dorsetshire contributed hundreds more from their 8 inches guns, and the secondary batteries poured out nearly 1,400 shells of smaller calibers. In total, over 700 large-caliber shells were aimed at Bismarck in less than 2 hours. A storm of steel that should have torn any ship apart. Yet, the underwater surveys decades later exposed a reality at odds with these figures. The main armor belt, designed to withstand the worst, shows almost no sign of defeat. Only 8 major shell holes have been found above the waterline, clustered in the superstructure and upper hull. Below the armor, the hull is nearly pristine with no torpedo holes or catastrophic breaches visible. This gap between the records and the wreck is not a matter of small errors or missed details. Every shell was counted, every salvo plotted in the moment, and the official reports left no doubt about the intensity of the attack. The evidence on the seafloor, however, tells a subtler story, one where overwhelming firepower left the ship's core defenses standing. The question lingers, if hundreds of heavy shells struck home, why do so few penetrations show up on the armored hull? The answer must lie inside beyond the reach of surface surveys. To understand how Bismarck truly died, investigators needed to look deeper, past the battered exterior and into the heart of the wreck itself. Bismarck's escape into the Atlantic set off one of the most relentless chases in naval history. The Royal Navy threw nearly every available ship into the hunt, but the ocean is vast and a single battleship can vanish into its folds. Then a faint trail changed everything. A torpedo hit during the Denmark Strait battle had ruptured a fuel tank, leaving a thin, iridescent slick on the waves. British cruisers Norfolk and Suffolk, shadowing Bismarck through fog and rain, used this oil as a breadcrumb, confirming the ship's position even when radar contact was lost. The trail was both a clue and a curse. Proof that Bismarck was wounded, but also a sign that she was still moving, still dangerous. As the hours passed, British searchers expanded their net. The breakthrough came from the air. On May 26, a Catalina flying boat from 209 Squadron, piloted by Ensign Leonard B. Smith of the U.S. Navy, spotted Bismarck's wake at 10:30 a.m. roughly 700 m west of Brest. The coordinates flashed across the fleet. The enemy was no longer a shadow. This sighting gave the Royal Navy the vector it needed. Ark Royal Swordfish torpedo bombers were dispatched and the chase shifted from a search to a pursuit. Every hour counted. The crippled battleship was racing for the safety of occupied France. Her fate hanging on a damaged rudder and the narrowing gap between hunter and hunted. At 2:10:05 on May 26, 1941, a single torpedo dropped by a Swordfish biplane from HMS Ark Royal struck Bismarck's stern. The hit jammed the battleship's rudders hard to port, locking the ship into a wide, helpless circle. Engineers tried to regain control, but the steering gear was wrecked beyond repair. With Bismarck unable to maneuver, the Royal Navy closed in for the kill. At dawn, HMS Rodney and King George V opened fire from less than 16,000 m. Their salvos landed with crushing regularity. 16 inches and 14 inches shells smashed into Bismarck's superstructure, tearing apart the bridge, masts, and gun turrets. The upper works were swept by fire and splinters. Secondary batteries joined in, adding thousands of smaller shells to the barrage. Within minutes, the main battery turrets were silenced, one after another. Anti-aircraft guns and fire control towers disintegrated under the impact. By 09:31, all 4 main turrets were out of action. The deck was a ruin of twisted steel and burning debris. Yet, beneath the chaos, Bismarck's armored hull still floated. The 13 inches belt, battered but not breached, kept the ship buoyant. Despite the fury raining down from above, the lower hull remained sealed against the sea. Even as the superstructure vanished under the hammering, the ship refused to sink quickly. British gunners poured shell after shell into the wreck, but Bismarck's core defenses held. The paradox grew with every minute. A ship devastated above the waterline, yet stubbornly afloat. Its final destruction delayed by the very engineering that once made it so feared. James Cameron's 2002 expedition pushed the limits of underwater technology. The mere submersibles accompanied by micro-ROVs, small remotely operated vehicles, navigated the labyrinth of collapsed steel inside Bismarck. These bots carried high-resolution cameras and scanning systems capturing thousands of images for photogrammetric analysis. What they found inside the wreck was evidence of catastrophic internal failure. Decks once separated by meters of air now lay compressed together, crushed downward by 10 to 13 feet. Bulkheads designed to resist battle shock were warped and buckled inward, bearing the unmistakable signature of sudden, overwhelming flooding. Survey data revealed that the armored hull, so effective against British shells, had become a trap once water forced its way inside. The bots traced long, peeling tears in the lower hull, rips that ran beneath the armor belt, consistent not with explosions, but with the ship's final slide down the volcanic slope. These tears matched the physics of impact. As Bismarck struck the seafloor and continued to slide, the immense pressure and shifting rock sheared open the plates from below. Inside, the compressed decks and collapsed compartments told a story of lost buoyancy. The ship's core was hollowed out by water, its strength undone from within. Forensic mapping by Cameron's team made clear that the battle outside was only half the story. The final destruction happened in darkness under crushing pressure as the Atlantic claimed the ship from the inside out. Inside Bismarck's shattered hull, the final act was carried out not by enemy fire, but by her own crew. As British shells rained down. Like and subscribe please.